I think we can all agree that consent is very important. For example, the far left likes to talk about, the college rape statistics. And what is it? I've heard it be like 1 in 3, 1 in 4, and 1 in 5. One of those 3 women will be raped at some point while they're at college. This is a very repeated statistic. And of course, at this point, I think we all know the problems with it. Even though these stats have been regurgitated by Obama, by Biden, I think, certainly by Hillary Clinton, and by other prominent people on the left, they have been routinely debunked years ago, and so many times that I probably don't really need to go into it in detail. But basically, the statistic was based on surveys, which were less than honest, let's say. For example, the survey asked if a woman had ever had sex after their partner expressed displeasure with them, or alternatively criticized their attractiveness. They asked if she had sex with someone after they showed that they were unhappy. Students who said yes were put into that 1 in 5 statistic, because the idea was that they didn't give informed consent. For example, if their partner expressed displeasure with them and then they had sex with them, maybe they were coerced into doing it. If their partner criticized their attractiveness and then had sex with them, maybe they were being negged. If their partner appeared to be unhappy and then she had sex with him, maybe he was just manipulating her. So basically, they cast the widest possible net over some sexual behaviors that, whether or not they can be considered immoral, certainly can't be called sexual assault. Additionally, every single woman that said they had had sex while drunk, they also threw them into this statistic, because of the idea that you can't consent while drunk. That idea comes from the same school of thought that generated this poster, where 2 drunk people had sex, but apparently only the man was guilty of rape. It even says Josie could not consent, but he couldn't either, right? Here is another poster on the topic, and this one gives us a very useful checklist that we can use to define consent. What is consent? Enthusiastic, sober, mutual, voluntary, communicated clearly before any sexual activity. Sex without consent is sexual assault. It is a crime and it's not okay. All right. Fair enough. But of course, the conversation rapidly shifted away to enthusiastic consent. Now, what enthusiastic consent is basically just consent given all of the time. And okay, makes sense, right? Like, I can only assume this idea was thought up as a reaction to the situation where somebody might consent to sex, and then, halfway through it, you're like, I kind of want to stop this, I'm not really into it anymore, and then pull the brakes on it, but then the other person just keeps going, and then rapes them because, well, they consented at the start. So the idea of enthusiastic consent is that you consent all the way through the sexual encounter. And yes, that actually does make sense, because if you say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore in the middle of doing it, and the other person doesn't stop, then yes, that's sexual assault, that's rape, okay. But it also led to, some weird situations where you'd get this old PSA. I hope I can find it and put it in the video. If I can't, I'm sure you probably remember what I'm talking about. It's from 2015 or 2016. And it was of how enthusiastic consent works. And there was this couple very clearly getting into it. And he asks, "Can I touch your breast or something?" And she goes, "No." But then, so they keep making out. And then a few minutes later, he asks again, and then she says yes. And it's well, one, she already said no. So this is simply breaking her down and therefore is actually not consent, at least by your logic. 2, it implies that only women have to give consent, and that the consent of men is simply assumed, which is obviously not the case. And 3, most importantly of all, it doesn't understand how humans or human sexuality works. People do not behave in this way. Of course, people on the pro-enthusiastic consent side of the argument, they have legitimate points. Very clearly, there is at least some kind of obligation to ensure that your partner is enjoying the sex that you're having. Of course, if you're an asshole, you're not going to care about doing that. But if you actually care about your partner, yes, you do this. And I'm sure that there are some people who would appreciate that kind of attention, that you care enough about them that you're willing to ask them if they're still having a good time in the middle of the encounter. Of course, I would say that you should be able to tell if they're having a good time if you're any good at what you're doing. But more importantly, this kind of tramples all over a lot of what kinky people like to do. I know that they only really play act at the idea of removing consent, but they still like that illusion to be maintained at least through the encounter. In other words, people who want assertive, dominant partners who take charge during sex and tell them, not ask them, what to do, are being underserved by the enthusiastic consent model. And in fact, for them, if they have a sexual experience that they don't like, for them, consent wasn't violated even though there was no enthusiastic consent. For them, what they generally do is they will talk it out with their partner after it's over and then refine their strategy for next time. They understand that what happened to them sexually wasn't what they wanted, but they don't consider it sexual assault. But these people would, because they're fundamentally just neo-Puritans. And it's strange to call them neo-Puritans because the left was always, the pro-sexual liberation side of the argument. For example, you still get stuff like this: 7 reasons to stop shaming revealing fashion. The reasons themselves don't matter. The point of this, as well as the point of things like the slut walk, are that open sexuality should be normalized. That it doesn't matter what somebody, generally a woman, but let's be gender neutral about this, what somebody is wearing or how they're behaving. Unless they consent, it doesn't count as consent. And okay, fair enough. But what doesn't make sense to me is the idea that sex is wonderful and amazing, and you should have as much of it as much as you want, and it's so safe and it's so great that there's absolutely no problems with it. Go off to university and fuck everyone, and it's amazing. There's absolutely no moral aspect to sex at all. Do whatever you want. And at the same time, sex is also so dangerous that you need to fill out consent forms and have them signed in triplicate and ask every 5 seconds if your partner likes what you're doing. These two things are mutually exclusive. Sex is either completely safe and therefore harmless, or sex is dangerous. You should be careful about it. But people on the left don't like that. They don't like the idea that they may need to occasionally take responsibility for what they do rather than simply have fun. And I do think that it's this hypocrisy that has created the Me Too movement. Because Me Too has covered everything under the sun now, hasn't it? Assume for a minute, just for the sake of argument, that every single Me Too claim was true, okay? That everything that has ever been said about by anybody throughout Me Too has been a legitimate sexual assault claim. Well, what does that mean? That means that everyone who was accused of rape actually raped them. Okay. Everyone who was accused of assault actually sexually assaulted them. Okay. What about people who didn't rape or sexually assault, but the claim was that they simply acted creepy? Like, you know the whole Angry Joe thing that came out like a few weeks ago? Where apparently Joe didn't actually do anything sexual to this woman. It was just kind of awkward. And then she spun it into this creepy encounter where he like used his power over her because he was like a male and he was this big name in YouTubing and she was this tiny Twitch streamer. I mean, even if her story is true, he still didn't rape her, he still didn't sexually assault her, but Joe's still getting Me Too'd right now. Pro Jared had the receipts. It turned out everything he did was consensual, but there are still people who hate him because of simply the power imbalance between him and his fans whom he had some kind of sexual contact with, even though everyone involved consented. And I can understand that. I do believe there's at least some kind of moral imperative not to abuse your position over your fans. But at the same time, that's not the same as consent. That's not the same as some kind of legal statute. There are people who very clearly consented to sex, but then for some reason later they ended up hating the person, so they retroactively withdraw that consent. This is sometimes known as informed consent, where the consent given doesn't actually count if they don't have the full story. And again, there's some logic to this. If you have an STD, you don't disclose that, you have sex with somebody else, and they consent to the sex, and then you give them the STD, and they're like, well, I didn't know. Like, what the hell, man? I didn't consent to this. There is at least a claim of sexual assault there because they didn't give informed consent. They would not have had sex with you had they known that you had an STD. And while that seems like sound logic on the surface, where does it end? For example, if you get with a woman who very clearly is a gold digger, and is kind of shallow, and it turns out that she's just trying to sleep with you in order to maybe get some of your money, but you lied about your income, and that lie was the only thing that made her attracted to you. Does that mean that she didn't give informed consent? Are those things that you learn about your partner later that you dislike reason enough to be able to warp back in time and withdraw the consent that you gave? Well, some feminists think so, yeah. However, that opens up a can of worms that they don't like to talk about. For example, every single time that a woman has trapped a man with a baby, I'm sure he didn't consent to being the father, but suddenly the language completely shifts in that case. How many times have you heard, well, he consented to sex, so he consented to the pregnancy? If you told a woman that, you would be dragged through social media as the worst misogynist ever. But it's said routinely to men. Again, it is part of the sexual hypocrisy that is the feminist formulation of consent. I mean, check out this article from Body and Soul. Women are being asked to record consent videos, and what the hell? Some men are going to extreme lengths to ensure they have consent. Well, if this is the nature of consent now, doesn't this make sense? Make sure that you have consent before you go forward? If consent is this nebulous, wouldn't you want something concrete? Or is the fact that it is nebulous and not concrete something that feminists want so that they can use consent as a bludgeon? A worrying new trend is seeing women being asked to record consent videos before having sex with men who fear they will be accused of sexual assault afterwards. How is it worrying? This is ensuring consent. What is your problem? One woman recalled how her partner had whipped out his smartphone before they became intimate in order to film her verbal consent. Despite sleeping together a few times before, her casual fling grabbed his phone, suddenly and without warning, right before having sex to confirm she wanted to sleep with him. Switching on the camera, he said, "Could you really quickly just say that you want to have sex with me?" Unsurprisingly, the woman didn't know how to respond, so he asked again, "Could you just say that you consent to having sex with me? This is the world that you've built. This is the world that you wanted." As it turns out, they don't like that new world. I really want to encourage y'all to stop robbing men who don't take you on dates. The only way to effectively kill this Netflix and chill trend they have gotten so comfortable with is if every time they invite a new girl over, something different goes missing. I mean, it sounds like you're a real piece of work. Thankfully, I'm not dating anymore. I don't have to deal with this nonsense. But damn, you wanted the Netflix and chill world. You wanted the whole no strings attached thing. The hell are you complaining about? Not don't commit, it's don't take you on dates. You want guys to spend money on you, that's what it is. Of course, in this new world, governments all over the place are putting out PSAs and little videos and things talking about consent and how important it is.
Hey guys,
let's talk consent.
When does no mean no?
Always.
Even in a relationship.
Not in the mood?
That's a no. Asleep?
No. Drunk?
No. Passed out?
No.
And if I say stop?
Even during?
Again, no.
When does no mean yes?
Never.
These are not guidelines.
It's the law.
You get this already.
Awesome.
If not,
Do us all a favor.
Don't be
That.
guy.
The most mind-blowing one came out of Sweden back in February and went viral for at least a little bit of time. You guys remember this?
Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square.
Oh my god, dude. This guy in the background here, he's like, what the fuck is my life? How did I get this job? How can I get out? Oh my god. Now, what I didn't actually know is that the no-no square didn't come from there. It's actually like an older meme from like 2009. Thanks, Know Your Meme. I didn't know. Now, you'd think with all of this extensive focus on consent, that it would be their number one value. It would be the thing that they consider to be the most important. However, it turns out that no, consent's really not all that high on their list when push comes to shove. Straight men must date trans women to combat hate, say activists. Can white people have racial dating preferences? The gay men who hate women, complete with a vaginas are disgusting image. Jesus, look at this Chad. The point is, when sexual politics are at play, consent is no longer personal, it's political. So if you have a sexual racial preference, then therefore you are racist. You using your consent in this way is you abusing your privilege and perpetuating oppression. If you're a man who wouldn't date a trans woman, then in their minds you're perpetuating the myth that trans women aren't women. And if you're a gay male, then to some radical feminists out there, there's only two reasons why. Either one, you can't attract any woman, so you've decided to just fuck other men. Or two, you hate women so much that you've become a male separatist in a sense. Here's a very informative Twitter thread on the topic by everyone's favorite trans brainlet, Anna Valens. If you don't want to fuck a trans person because trans bodies squick you out, that's transphobic. No one is taking away your consent, we're just challenging you to rethink what kind of bodies you do and don't desire. AKA desirability politics. Attraction is political. Cis people love to criticize beauty standards until those beauty standards show their own biases towards dating, fucking, and hanging with other cis people. Then suddenly attraction is some weird apolitical entity that nature created. I don't believe in proving to a cis person that they've been attracted to a passing trans person at some point in their lives. Just tell them that they don't want to fuck trans bodies because they think trans people are gross. Draw that line in the sand. There's nothing else there. To be honest, I usually find these kinds of cis people super boring. It means you're more interested in conformity than challenging yourself and coming up with your own beliefs. And people who consistently conform to meet society's expectations are really interesting people. Solely hanging around cis people is not the human default. It's a conscious decision a cis person makes. It could be the fact that there's no trans people around because, frankly, trans people are very rare. The world makes you think cisness is the default. Okay, you know what? This is just honestly a lot of cope. Because I guess Anna Valens got rejected by some lesbian or something because they didn't want to suck the dick, you bigot. But this really is the thesis, isn't it? Attraction is political. But no, consent is paramount. Consent is more important than politics. Stop behaving like an incel. And the minute that you remove sex from the conversation entirely and just talk about general consent, their entire thesis goes out the window. Because consent is not a purely sexual thing. Consent is the clear boundary of what you allow, sexual or not. But these people who jabber on about consent constantly, they do not give two shits about it. Let me show you. With cities across America burning and black communities in pain, many white people have continued posting selfies and pictures of food on social media as if nothing is wrong, and it is not going unnoticed. You know the whole "I just want to grill" thing? This is their reply to that. You do not have the right to just want to grill. You do not have the right to be left alone, according to these people. If there is a problem and they need your privilege, they will demand it of you, and your consent doesn't matter. The worst thing is, JonTron's been silent since the George Floyd controversy happened. I'm a fan of JonTron personally, but that's because I assumed he grew from what he did. The what he did thing I'm guessing was the Destiny debate. His silence tells us otherwise, and it's sad. JonTron's silence eventually became "I just want to grill." But the point is, the recent riots, the George Floyd thing, that whole mess, we are at a point now where if you are silent, if you are neutral, if you are simply trying to get on with your day and ignore the burning around you, then that neutrality itself is violence against the black community. Against the BIPOCs. I guess that's the new term they're using now. Basically, if you do not give active, enthusiastic consent to being unabashedly pro Black Lives Matter in public, then you are being violent towards them. No, really. Here's a conversation between two SJWs fighting each other over who can be more of an SJW, and it shows my point exactly. By staying silent, you choose the side of the oppressor. Silence is violence. So where does one submit their showed up on Twitter receipt so they can redeem their not a racist card? Yikes. Yeah, big yikes. Stop telling people what they need to do on their social media. There's many other ways you can help the movement without engaging in performative allyship. Shut the fuck up and shave your face, ugly. Paul here, he has a point. He talks about performative allyship because that is, basically just posting on Twitter about how bad things are and then thinking that you've helped the situation. And there is definitely this purity spiral happening on the left where they're eating each other over whose virtue signaling is simply performative and who actually means it. It's kind of getting wild out there. But yeah, silence is violence. If you say nothing, if you try to just get on with your life, you might as well have been the one to put the knee on George Floyd's neck. At least that's how these people see it. If you are white and able-bodied, be out there and do what you can for your black comrades. Listen to them, follow their lead, stand between them and 12, bring water and food, do what you can, show love to those who need it. If you've donated and you're helping the good fight, please consider throwing me like any amount of money. I'm disabled and I have top surgery coming up soon. Yeah, okay, fine, dude. Fine, I get it. Here's your grift. Understood. But yeah, this passage here. In the Chaz video, yes, the Chaz video is still coming. There's an article where the protesters in Seattle blatantly say that white money and white resources need to be converted into black power. And that is simply how BLM views them, as resources to be used, exploited, and discarded. Everyone that is for Black Lives Matter is definitely taking note of everyone who is staying silent. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. They have always viewed the centrists as being just as bad as the Nazis. They have always viewed the neutral or the apolitical as being just as bad as their opponents. They have always said, you are with us or against us. And if you stay silent, they will come for you, just like they have come for everyone else before you. And so we come to the end of the line. Silence is consent. That is the Black Lives Matter protest slogan right now. Silence equals consent. If you are not actively speaking out, if you are not actively fighting what they believe to be the good fight, then you are consenting to the status quo. You are consenting to the murder of George Floyd. You are complicit in police brutality. And the only reason why these people didn't understand the obvious other meaning of this slogan, when talking about sexual consent, is because they never actually cared about it in the first place. Yes, this implies that a rape victim who is too terrified to say anything is simply consenting. This implies that someone who is passed out is consenting. And that's because when push comes to shove, they never cared about consent in the first place. That is why they continuously harp on about consent, while simultaneously opposing any efforts to actually make consent more concrete, more public, and more known. They talk about consent when it benefits them, but when people's consent goes the other way politically, when they use their consent to approve of or disapprove of things that they don't like, suddenly their consent is problematic. Consent is a popular idea, so it's a very easy talking point for the radical left to pick up and make their own. However, the main reason they are so hypocritical about it is because they don't derive their moral system's legitimacy from consent at all. They don't care about your consent. They care about your purity. The more pure you are, the more moral consideration you're given. And the less pure you are, the less your consent matters. And the more you simply need to just get in line, march, and do what you're told. Force yourself between the police and the black protesters. Suck the dick, bigot. It doesn't matter if you consent, it matters that you do it. Because the people that you are protecting, the people that you are servicing, are more morally pure than you. That's how they view this. The radical left talks a big game on consent, but has never truly cared about it. That's why on this topic, the way to beat them is continuing to enforce consent at a rigorous standard, at the standard they claim to love. It's a strange time when you get such disparate figures like Vice President Mike Pence and Ninja the Twitch streamer, both having the same puritanical yet effective views on women, wherein they basically avoid them in order to avoid getting Me Too'd. And that is their choice to do so. That is the action they have consented to committing. And so, if consent is going to be the bludgeon that the radical left uses on everyone else, we might as well use it on them right back. If they're going to derive this much power from simply talking about consent as if it's the most important thing, then we can derive even more power by actually making it the most important thing. And that shouldn't be hard for us, since consent is simply freedom in action. Alright guys, I'll talk to you next time. I love you.